Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to Ellensburg, Washington, USA. The local time is 5:48 p.m. here on the west coast of North America, and we will begin our program called Spokane Geology at the top of the hour at 6 o'clock. 12 minutes from now, how's everybody doing tonight? Hello, Karen. Robert, thank you for the report. Audio and video is good. Nice to see that. Liz is upstairs doing Pilates. But we will assume that the Wi-Fi is going to be a friend to us tonight. You bet. We're checking in, making sure this is working properly. We're also kind of saying hi to each other, making sure things are good in your world. Hello, John. Thanks for all the information. I haven't had a chance to reply to you. Great to hear what's going on up there. Mark in Arizona, hello. Washington, D.C., the hockey fan is checking in. Lots of comments scrolled very quickly there. Thanks for the report, loud and clear focused. Kenneth from Orcas Island. Wisconsin Rapids. Ah, the memories, Wisconsin Rapids. I had an absolutely crazy and wild roommate, college roommate from Wisconsin Rapids. I can still hear his screams in my ears. Go Packers. Oh yeah. Them guys are looking good this year. Oh, geez. Rogers. Hello, Rob. If you're new to us and you're confused why we're not beginning, we begin these about 10 minutes or so early, just to visit. So if you're watching this in replay form, go ahead and scrub ahead 10 minutes and we'll begin the program, but it's still about 10 minutes to 6. Let's look at the schedule for the week. Uh-oh, Daddy just spilled his box of markers. I got a lot of stuff out in the grass here, and the wind, of course, just picked up, so I've got everything anchored down, but lots to look at. I'll get the chalkboard police, make sure that they're happy. Okay, so tonight we're talking about Spokane Geology, and tomorrow night George Beck, who's a petrified wood expert, was a petrified wood expert 100 years ago, and I have made contact with his grandson, who lives still in Yakima, and we'll explore the history of George Beck. We did a little bit of that a couple months ago, but I've got a few tricks up my sleeve for tomorrow night. George Beck. Thursday night, starting from scratch. I don't know, I guess I'll start Thursday morning. A guy named Bob sent me some amazing links to the geologic work done by Israel Russell. So we're back to more than 100 years ago, the early days of Washington statehood, and some amazing geologic work done by Israel Russell. So I'm particularly excited to dig into that. Thank you, Bob, for the links. Saturday morning, hope the weather holds. We'll be outdoors. That's the valley that I live in, Cretaceous Valley. Oh, son of a gun, we're getting some sun, which means we're gonna get the dancing oak again. All right, I can handle that. And then speaking of starting from scratch, I've got some homework to do. I've always meant to present somewhere on paleomagnetism because it keeps coming up. So it's good for me to learn new things. We've had a particularly windy week, and somebody turned off the wind machine last night in the middle of the night, and then it's been raining most of the day, but somebody turned the rain machine off, so everybody's out and about. A lot of walkers, even when it may sound weird, but when it's super windy here, it's not even pleasant to go out and walk a whole lot. So very pleasant evening here. If that sun stays out, I'm going to shed a couple layers. Still doing okay? Hello, Patrick. Good to see you, and Mother Teresa. Mother Teresa. Where did I? No, I steal my mugs from my wife. She's the one that has an eye for good mugs, so it's a communal coffee mug cabinet, so I help myself. I don't even ask. I don't even ask, Patrick. Haven't been in trouble too much yet. A couple of thank yous. Got a piece of mail from Spokane. Consuelo in Spokane. She sent me this DVD. So we'll see tonight that we're going to be talking about Spokane, but using a number of things that we've already discussed in past sessions. So we had a Bing Crosby session, so we'll touch on Bing again tonight. Thank you, Consuelo, for that. This book that I did not know existed, Short Nights of the Shadow Catcher. Short Nights of the Shadow Catcher, talking about a photographer named Edward Curtis and his brother. They had some bad blood. Famous author, by the way. So I guess I've been meaning to talk about that too. I always call him Ashel Curtis, but Consuelo corrected me on the pronunciation. What did you say here? Actually, let's see if we can get a consensus. I really like Ashel Curtis, but the pronunciation according to Consuelo is Ajul. Long A and a soft J. So, I'll practice in the mirror. Ajul. You give me a thumbs up if that's the way to do it. I'm from Wisconsin. I still have manure on my boots. I mean, what do I know? Orange Jello, right, Patrick? So thank you, Consuelo, for the book and the DVD. I'll especially use the book in short order. And Pierre, the animator in Boston, has been scheming. We're not doing any Cozy Fort tonight, but I do want to share with you a little mock version of a very short little animation. Pierre has been a fan of our live streams, and he's kind of thinking how he can kind of lend his talents to what we do. So this is a little silent movie, but you might enjoy it. Sorry, Patrick. There it is. There will be some muffler boys tonight, Pierre. Thanks for making that. No idea how you do it. How do he do it? like we got a little extra delay here tonight for some reason in the comments. But I'm seeing you react to that right now. When I watch these in replay, the comments are pretty much real time, so it's a little easier to watch. I wonder what that's all about. All right, I easily have 25 different items here in the grass, so freewheeling tonight, man. I got a plan. The Europeans are fast asleep, except for a few that might have a little insomnia. Hello, Natalie from Portland. It was nice to check in with you yesterday. Beaverton, Oregon. Yeah, it makes sense. You know, these weeknights is kind of a slightly different crowd just because of the time zone. We got some Spokane people. Oh, we got a Schweitzer in the crowd. Somebody from Switzerland's awake. Ah, yeah. Huh? I don't know what that was about. Hello, Belgium. I saw that word buffering, which I'm not fond of, so I need to quick check in with you, and then I'll do my little meditative walk here for a minute. We doing okay? Don't like that word buffering. Are we okay? Caitlin, Anchorage, hello, Florida. Boy, delay. 10, no buffer, 5x5. Okay, great. Give me a minute and we'll get started. Thank you. We got sun. I'm gonna get comfortable. You get comfortable too. Well, good evening, everybody. A pleasant good evening to you. Thank you for joining us here in Ellensburg, Washington, USA. I'm so glad you took the time to join us. We have a nice evening here, and our topic tonight is Spokane Geology. Spokane is a city in Washington, and it's 3 hours away. I mean, I was just thinking about that today. I get over to Spokane quite a bit. I enjoy that city very much, and I have many good memories of visiting there for a Bloom's Day or Hoop Fest, or a bunch of stuff. I got offered my first teaching job at a conference there at the convention center back in 1989. So there's a lot of pleasant things that come back to me for Spokane, but it's 3 hours away. And I was just thinking, if I drove north 3 hours from here, I'd almost be to the border. So what am I doing driving 3 hours east-west all the time? Why don't I go north? Well, that's something we touched on a while back. So the point is, I've been to Spokane enough. I have enough contacts, former students who are teaching there, and other kind of geologists who have taught me over the years, that I feel semi-comfortable about the Spokane area. And so I'm happy to pass along what I know as an outsider about the geology not only of Spokane proper, but this kind of general region that you see on the chalkboard here. We'll head over to Ritzville briefly. We'll be up towards Pond Array, Sandpoint even, over to Coeur d'Alene, down to Pullman. I'm not really sure where we're going, but anyway, I've got a bunch of potential ideas. And to start with, let me just pass along that as I was starting to kind of put together what I wanted to do with you tonight about Spokane, I was writing out stuff just kind of that came to my head, and then I thought, well, wait a minute. I actually wrote all this out. I wrote a whole script, actually, for the Spokane area and the geology there. And it brings back some painful memories because my collaborator for many years, Tom Foster, who had a website called hugefloods.com, the last project we worked on together before his untimely demise and his sudden death a few months ago, which we're still trying to wrap our minds around. We're still kind of numb to it. But we basically had a series called I-90 Rocks. And there's 3 installments of that exist on hugefloods.com. In other words, those are the 3 episodes that were finished. So the idea for I-90 Rocks was to take video viewers on YouTube from I-90, starting in Seattle and driving all the way to Spokane. And my job was to write out a script for each of the legs in the journey. So we had a Ellensburg segment, we had a Vantage segment, we had a Moses Lake segment, etc. And he had all these amazing visuals. So we did a Seattle show, an Issaquah show, and a Snoqualmie Pass show. But we won't finish it. So I went through some old emails with Tom and found some photos that he had attached to some emails talking about the progress. So here's one photo that was supposed to go in the Spokane segment where I'm looking at some metamorphic rock right next to I-90 there, kind of close to the medical leg exit, or the leg exit to Cheney, basically. So we can talk about this briefly, but so anyway, I'm not sure what's going to happen with all of his photos and the rough drafts of things that we were putting together. It's still too early to try to figure out what's going on with that. But anyway, my point is not to be a downer to begin with, but I've got some stuff already packaged from that work I was doing with Tom. And before I forget, when we were doing that, he started an Instagram page and was posting photos like this. So you can find on Instagram, he called it Huge Floods on Instagram. There's just a few posts, but here's looking at some amazing pillow basalts at Pitcher and Bowl, is that what it's called? Or Bowl and Pitcher? Pretty close, down along the river, just downriver from downtown Spokane. Amazing pillows in the Priest Rapids lava. And then many of you know that there are almost unbelievably perfect basaltic columns by the Spokane airport. And so somehow we're going to weave the basalt that's there in Spokane into our discussion today. Since I've got the laptop open, here's a photo that I just found, I snapped of Tom at that same. These are the best pillow basalts I've ever seen. And Tom read up on Bowl and Pitcher, and we hiked in there. It's not much of a hike, really, but that was going to be a featured part of our Spokane episode. Okay, I'm getting sad now, so we're going to change the topic, okay? So, what am I going to do with you tonight? What did I write out in that script? If I want to boil down all the amazing geology in the Spokane area, can we get it down to just a couple of bite-sized things? I think we can. Here's our roadmap for tonight. He goes to the whiteboard. So there is a pretty impressive variety of geology, bedrock geology in the Spokane area. And you'll notice that we have dates over here in millions of years. So, of course, many of you who are veterans of our program know about the 16 million year old basalts. That's the German chocolate cake. So there is German chocolate cake at Spokane. There's some plant fossils that are in some siltstones that are slightly older, but also interbedded with the basalts. There's some older granites between 170 million years old, Cretaceous basically, back during the age of the dinosaurs. And then there's also, in the Spokane, Washington area, some bedrock that's more than 1 billion years old. 1,000 million is the same as 1 billion, right? And so there's some metamorphic rocks from the earliest days of the Pacific Northwest, plus some Ice Age floods. And there's some major Ice Age flood stuff to discuss here. So I'll keep coming back to this, but I think my loose plan is to kind of work our way from bottom to top. And maybe I can say it this way. In many people's minds, geology is just this. Like you open a textbook and you see this is a stratigraphic column and there are some unconformities representing a huge loss in time between these units. And you know what, I don't know, what, you write them down and then you memorize them and then you regurgitate them on a test. Is that what geology is? Not to me. This is just the beginning. You know what I like to do. I like to take each of these rock units and tell a story with them. And I want to do that in a relatively short amount of time so that we have time for your live question and answers. And we have some Spokane people who maybe are absolute monsters with Spokane geology. In other words, they know a lot and we can kind of learn from each other. Because again, I live 3 hours away. But let's do the main story for each of these. If you're a veteran of these backyard sessions, you kind of already know what I'm about to say, but let's try to do it quickly. We start with these oldest rocks. Why are they here, and what is the main story of the Spokane area more than 1 billion years ago? Well, that's the supercontinents live stream that we did, 3 weeks ago, 5 weeks ago. Time has kind of all blended together in most of our minds. So when I look at that very old Precambrian metamorphic rock, and it pops up at Steptoe Butte, Precambrian metamorphic rock. It pops up at areas closer to Spokane, and you're like, where? I don't know. Hauser Lake. You see, this is a veteran move. I wrote down some place names for myself because I don't know many of these places. Hauser Lake? Huh? That photo off of I-90 at the exit at Medical Lake, there's some good metamorphic rock there, some migmatite or some swirled gneiss. So we're talking about gneiss and quartzite and argillite. What is the main story from those old metamorphic rocks? Well, here we go. So let's take a moment, soak this in. I'm drawing you a picture. Actually, a lot of people that grow up in eastern Washington say pitcher. I'm drawing you a picture of John Stockton's house, Spokane, AKA Spokane. And Australia has arrived from the west and backed up, boop, 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 right into John Stockton's backyard. And for hundreds of millions of years, I'm not making this up, those Precambrian metamorphic rocks tell us this story. If you look at the quartzite in Steptoe Butte, you look at that metamorphic rock next to the Medical exit, you looked at the Belt Supergroup in western Montana, it's all telling this story. That there was another continent right next to Spokane. And you're like, well, this doesn't make any sense. Spokane isn't at the coast. It was back then, older than 750 million years ago. There was no Pacific Ocean here. In Australia, not everybody buys Australia, by the way. It's still an open question. The newest data says Australia. Some holdouts still like Siberia next to John Stockton's house. Some like South China next to John Stockton's house. Some even like Antarctica. But the point is, we have a lot of evidence in the Pritchard Formation and other specific key units that Andy Bunnington at Spokane Community College knows very well, tells us a story about a continent parked right at Spokane. And then starting 750 million years ago, that rock started to back away. Now, we're just getting rolling with the geology, but since I'm talking about John Stockton's house, and some of you might be confused, I don't know if you saw our last live stream. It was Sunday morning. I had just gotten some mail on Saturday. We were about to talk about the San Andreas Fault, and I was doing my little thank yous, and I showed this. and it was a piece of mail from John Stockton's house in Spokane, Washington. And the joke is, for years, instead of saying Spokane, I've said John Stockton's house because I like the way he conducts his life, just as a distant observer. He's a major guy, major celebrity, career assists and steals leader in the NBA, all the NBA. And yet he goes home and just leads a normal life in Spokane. So this seems out of character for such a private, reserved guy. But I haven't heard from anybody since Saturday saying that they punked me. Ha ha ha, you fell for it. It's not John Stockton, it's me, you douche. So I may be up to 75% that this is a real thing. I'm allowing myself to believe that John Stockton heard about us. Thank you. Okay, I want to keep going with the story. That's Stockton's house. We separate Australia. We start opening the Pacific Ocean. And then do you remember our other whiteboard? We got to wait patiently hundreds of millions of years for the next bedrock unit in the Spokane area. Do you see how much time is missing here? Do you see how many stories we've been cheated out of? That's kind of how things work in geology. We only have a fraction of the rock record recording geologic time available to us. All we can rely on are just the scraps of records that we can find. Most of the stories are lost. Okay, so we go ahead to the Cretaceous, the dinosaur time, and we have significant granites. Where? Let's read together. The 7 Mile area. I don't know where that is. Sorry. Where can I find the granite that's Cretaceous in age? Mount Spokane, a major landmark north of Spokane. The Dishman Hills, just south of I-90. Those are 2 places. You might have some others. If you're a Spokane person, can you type in a few other places where you know we have Cretaceous granites to observe? What's the story of the Cretaceous granites? Do you know, veteran person? Do you know, veteran person? Why would we have a bunch of granites in the Cretaceous in the Spokane area? What story could be told there? I'll do it very quickly. This is going back to the first live stream I did out here on St. Patrick's Day. It also goes back to a Pacific Northwest tectonics live stream I did in the front porch maybe 2 weeks ago. Idaho arc. A volcanic arc, a line of volcanoes. And so now this is a time where we actually do have an ocean plate, muffler boy, called the Kula Plate, ocean plate subducting beneath North America, and there was a line of volcanoes, much like today's Cascades, but back between 170 million years old. So that granite, both north and south of downtown Spokane, are ghost volcanoes. In other words, granites that were the magmas that were feeding those cones that used to stand at Spokane back when the Kula used to subduct there. But since that time, those volcanoes have shut off. And you know what happens next if you know that lecture. We have good evidence now that instead of the Kula Plate subducting, forget the dates now, can I remember them off the top of my head? I guess between about 60 and 40, I can't even remember now. Between 60 and 40 million years ago, there was a spreading ridge that was subducting, making the Chalice magmas that were younger. And then we add a bunch of terrains in Baja, BC, and we bring the Cascades to their present location. So you're like, boy, that went by quick. I don't know what you're talking about. Well, you know, what is this? Live stream 61? How many hours are we talking about total? So I need to refer to things occasionally, like we've been in class, you and I, for a whole academic term plus more. By the way, it's finals week this week here at Central. Virtual finals week. And so we've been at this a while. I need to start kind of referring back to things we've already talked about, assuming you've seen it. Okay. What am I doing? I'm marching up through the stratigraphic column talking about basic rock stories. So we had the old shoreline of North America back during the Precambrian. The edge of the continent was at John Stockton's house. Then we flash forward to less than 100 million years ago. That's younger than Pangaea. And we had big, beautiful Mount Rainier-like volcanoes. And you're like, really? Where was the Mount Rainier? Mount Spokane. Oh, really? Mount Spokane used to be a volcano? No. Mount Spokane is made out of the granite that used to be molten and feeding the cone that used to stand there. Okay. Now we're flashing to much younger days. We're jumping to the middle part of the Miocene epoch. The mid-Miocene. There was a climatic optimum at the time. It was warm. Not quite as warm as 56 million years ago, but it was still warm enough globally to have these hot, humid fossils that have been found. Most famously at a place called Clarkia. Do you know Clarkia? I had to look up Clarkia an hour ago on Google Earth. I got tipped off of a couple of the local quarry owners that they've seen some of the programs and invited me over. I very much appreciate that. I'm not a huge fossil guy, but I want to go over there and take a look at those Clarkia fossils. But they're just representative of the Latah Formation. So if you go in the Hangman Valley, if you go to a couple other places locally, directly in Spokane, you can get into these siltstones. There's some sands, there's some clays, but it's representing a time where there are lots of plant fossils. And that same set of plant fossils can be found all through Washington. Tomorrow we'll talk about the ginkgo petrified wood. Same general time as what we're talking about right here. Even the plant fossils up at Cooley Dam. Same general story, same general beds. Okay? Now we go to something that we know quite well, the basalts. Now, we've talked about the German chocolate cake a fair amount. It's been a while, though. Let's remind ourselves of a couple basic things. Once upon a time, kids, 16 million years ago, there were a series of impressive fractures, fissures we call them, these black lines. And those fissures produced crazy amounts of Hawaiian-like orange lava. And the basalts, called the Columbia River basalts, my favorite name is the German chocolate cake because it's 3 miles thick in places, started flooding the inland Pacific Northwest and pushed the Columbia River to a crazy course that most of it doesn't, downstream of Wenatchee, it doesn't do this anymore, but upstream of Wenatchee, it's still doing that today. The point is, look at Spokane. We're right at the edge. We're right at the edge of the Columbia River basalts. So if you go to Spokane Falls, the actual falls, right downtown, you know, it's pretty amazing, especially in springtime, right down there where the old World's Fairgrounds of 1974, you know, Hoop Fest. Turned the whole downtown into three-on-three tournament. Played in it, coached in it, great time. There's one particular flow that's a little bit younger called the Priest Rapids flow that came across and did approach Spokane and screwed up some drainage there to create those Clarkia plant fossil beds. But my main point is, it's most of the Grand Ronde lavas, the main phase lavas, that approached Spokane from the south, from the southwest. And those lavas started burying a landscape. So we're bringing the Columbia River basalts during Grand Ronde time, 16 million years ago, from the southwest, and that lava is getting to Spokane and even getting a little further north of Spokane. Let's look more carefully at where the edge of the German chocolate cake is in the Spokane area. I'm fond of these maps. I'm sure you can find a digital copy as well. It's from Washington Geological Survey. It used to be called Washington Department of Natural Resources. So there are these quadrant maps. So you take the state of Washington, split it into quarters, and this is the northeastern quarter, and there's all sorts of text in here and chemistry and everything else. But their summary map showing structures and other things does a nice job in showing us what we've done so far in this live stream. Spokane is here. Okay, so the brown is our German chocolate cake. So you can see how at Spokane and how you go south of Spokane, it's a big giant cow pie. There's nothing to look at, save for a few little places. Now here's part of the old Precambrian coastline that used to be kissing Australia. And then our pinks, whether they're a dark pink or a light pink, are some of our granites from the Idaho Arc and then also the Chalice magmas that we're talking about. So back from this point of view, I hope you can just see, first of all, if you've never seen a geologic map, the colors are different kinds of rocks and different ages of rocks. And my point is, think of all the complex geology, exotic terrains, old shoreline of old North America. Think of how much of that is beneath this German chocolate cake. It's down there, but we can't see it because there was enough basalt to cover things 16 million years ago, with just a few step toes poking their necks up above the basalt. I've got a cartoon I want to show you now that introduces a key point. Hope you're enjoying this. I think the thing I'm most excited to share with you tonight is one key concept with the Ice Age floods. So I'm looking forward to getting there, but we're kind of laying the groundwork for that. I've showed you this once before. People are very generous, and especially if they have old kind of prized things, they gift them to me. So I'm very grateful. So I've forgotten, I'm sorry who sent me this. This is an old publication by Fred Jones, copyright 1947. He's basically the Cooley Dam, From Hell to Breakfast. So I'm not at Spokane now, we're over at Cooley Dam, but the thing I want to show you is Fred must have been a very good illustrator, and I love what he's done here. He's showing our granites that we were just talking about that dominated the Spokane area up until 16 million years ago. And then here comes the flood basalts. And if you're a fan of studying granites and the stories that they tell, you're not a big fan of the basalts. And I guess vice versa. Wait, there's something else. The point I want to make, oh, is that it? Hang on, Patrick. Yeah. So this is still over at Grand Coulee, but this could be very appropriate for Spokane. The German chocolate cake pinches down to almost nothing in the Spokane area. So yes, I know we have the beautiful columns at the airport, Spokane Airport. And I know we have the amazing pillows, train boy, in downtown Spokane. But it's not a 3-mile thick German chocolate cake at Spokane. That's a big point, and you'll see why in just a bit. But interfingered with the basalts are some of those lake beds, Miocene lake beds that have the plant fossils within them, okay? So yes, there's German chocolate cake, but we're very thin. We're right at the end of the flow. And I meant to show you with that map. I guess I'll do it here. I meant to show you how far north the basalts get in the Spokane area. This is another statewide geologic map of the state of Washington. Spokane is at the tip of my finger here. This is a bit more complicated now, but the orange is the German chocolate cake, and then the yellow is a bunch of loess. We had a whole show on that, the kitchen flower blown in on top. But I want you to notice there is some German chocolate cake getting up pretty much close to Shawila, I believe. Although I don't know that area as well as I could. So the lavas didn't get right to Spokane and stop. What am I setting you up for? Oh, we're almost there. A couple book recommendations to help flesh things out. I've already plugged this a number of times. Marley Miller and Darrell Cowan, the new edition of the Roadside Geology of Washington. It is excellent, and they have some excellent detail that you can plug into my general story. I know I haven't shown you this one. This is called Washington Rocks by Eugene Keever, who taught a full career at Eastern Washington University, and Chad Pritchard, who is now at Eastern Washington University. And Richard, I'm sorry, I don't know your story. So this is kind of skipping around the state of Washington and going to specific sites. And they just really have a page. It's kind of almost like a coffee table type book. So they've got a little page on Mount Spokane talking about the granite. They've got a page of the Dishman Hills. And they're showing that a bunch of that granite was actually uplifted during the Eocene. In other words, during the Chalice time. That's called a core complex. And we've talked about core complexes briefly during that Pacific Northwest session. And while I'm at it, I just got this. A friend of mine, Rob Thomas, over at Montana, in Dillon, Montana. There's a brand new second edition of the Roadside Geology of Montana. And they talk about the old Precambrian rocks. They talk about Missoula floods, of course, and a number of other things. So if you're an old timer and you know these roadside books, but you only know the yellow covered ones from 35 years ago, they did great at the time, but these new editions of these roadside books are such improvements as far as graphics. To me, that's a big part of this delivery. Is the images, is the graphics, is the maps that are created. Okay, I think, yeah, 6:30. So before I quit, I want to do something here, and I want to do something with the Ice Age. So let's pause for dramatic effect. Harlen Bretz, you heard of him? We've had a number of programs on him. Let me give you a crash course if you haven't heard about him. There was one geologist named Harlen Bretz, University of Chicago. He arrived in Spokane in 1922. He got off the train. He had 3 science teachers in Spokane set him up for his first field season. Thomas Large, Alonzo Troth, Joseph McMahon. All 3 of those guys taught science at Lewis and Clark High School in the 1920s, and even earlier. And those 3 high school teachers, I want to learn more about. Are you watching this? Are you a Spokane person? Do you know how to get access to more history about those 3 names I just said? They are a key part of this story, because I am now convinced, without any evidence, by the way, that those high school teachers, my dad was a high school teacher, my wife is a high school teacher, I have a lot of respect. They're smart people, they know their local areas well. Those 3 high school teachers knew about the Ice Age floods. I'm convinced of it by now. And nothing is written about that. Bretz didn't give them any credit. So you might go, well, I don't believe it then. If Bretz didn't give any credit, well. So my point is, we're going to get Bretz into this area in 1922, and by 1930, he's written a half dozen or more scientific papers detailing all the evidence for these incredible cataclysmic floods of water coming from somewhere. Now, first exciting thing I have for you. Bretz had no trouble, just in a couple of summers, hot summers, mapping channels like the Drumheller channels, mapping the Grand Coulee, mapping these places where there was evidence of lots and lots of water. But Bretz had trouble mapping the Spokane area. Remember, he's talking about the Ice Age now. We're at the top. We're up here now. The rest of my session with you is up here in the Ice Age, less than 2 million years ago. These are truly loose rocks, loose gravels. And Bretz is like, what's up with all these loose gravels? And here's a map as late as 1928, where Bretz has the Canadian ice sheet over Spokane. And the edge of the Spokane ice sheet, as he called it, south of Spokane. And of course he had in pink here all of his Missoula flood channels. And he didn't call it that. He called it the Spokane Flood. So all through the 1920s, Bretz was controversial because he was talking about something happening quickly. Sounded like a Bible guy to me. He can't be a scientist if he's talking about a huge flood of water. So say the established scientists of the day. But Bretz has all this amazing mapping down here. Ritzville, south of Ritzville, going down toward Binge, Washtuckna, Hooper, Palouse Falls, all those places. He did amazing work there, but he didn't know where his water came from, and his maps all through the 1920s had that Spokane floodwater coming out from underneath the glacier. And his mistake was, and it wasn't just him, Joseph Pardee was there also in 1922 from Montana, a USGS guy, and they thought those hills, both north and south of Spokane, were glacial till. And they put that ice sheet there. Well, by 1930, Bretz realizes that the source of this water is Montana and is not coming out from directly underneath this ice. And in fact, those hills and those prairies north and south of Spokane are not glacial till at all. In fact, let me read from one of his reports. I just found this afternoon, and I had never really read it carefully, I guess. So this is from Bretz's 1923B paper. If you're a fan of this, it's his second 1923 paper. And even his text here contradicts what his map just says. So I'm a little still confused on this. J. Harlen Bretz, 1923. Because the record of the ice sheet from which came the streams that made the scablands is best preserved on the basalt plain about the city of Spokane and all along the south side of Spokane River, this has been named the Spokane Glaciation. Then he starts talking about different vintages of the ice, more than one ice advance. And then he says, for the absence of a terminal moraine along the southern edge of the area reached by the Spokane ice sheet, the writer himself has as yet no satisfactory explanation. It seems clear, however, that a moraine never was deposited, rather than it was once built and subsequently removed. I got to read that again. It seems clear, however, that a glacial moraine, never was deposited, rather than that it was once built and subsequently removed. That's awkward for me. The functioning of some scabland tracts absolutely required glacial ice against the north slopes of the unglaciated hills to their heads. Floated granite erratics among some of these hills also require blocking of valleys of glacial ice. A puzzling situation regarding glacial drainage exists in the vicinity of the small Spangle Lobe. Oh, there was something else I wanted to read for you here. A previous geologist has, in 1912, suggested that a pre-Spokane till beneath Luss at Cheney is of an older age. If it is, and if the post-Spokane glaciation is correctly ascribed to the latest advance, the Spokane glaciation should be a little bit older in age. Farther than this, the writer does not care to go. Ordinary criteria in use east of the Rocky Mountains for differentiation of drift sheets cannot safely be used for the correlation of these glaciations in Washington. The only one relied on here is the moraine-building habit of the Wisconsin ice sheet, a character which seems to have been worldwide. So he's struggling with maybe more than one ice advance, but he's really struggling. Where was the actual ice and where did the ice not reach? He never found a moraine, and yet he had this glacier this far south. Now, we can go to 1960. You remember the Bretz story. He's not accepted until the 1970s, essentially, by everybody. So even an old geologic map of Washington I've used for years Stuff's going to start flying away. Don't be too distracted by it. I'll find it. 1960. Here's Spokane. And the blue dashed line, edge of the glacial ice. They put a dash. They're like, I don't know, was the ice here? So this is easily 4 decades after Bretz did his amazing work about Ice Age flood deposits and Ice Age floods. And even Glacial Lake Missoula is the source. And yet these guys from the state of Washington are ignoring Bretz and just saying that the ice got as far south as Marshall, south of Spokane. All right, enough screwing around. Let's get to the cool thing. Here's the cool thing. Do you know the Spokane area? Our youngest boy went to University of Montana, so we were back and forth all the time. So no, the I-90 drive quite well. But have you gotten off of I-90 at Spokane, and have you done this drive from Spokane to Rathdrum? I think we have a viewer from Rathdrum who usually checks in. So if a few of you happen to know that drive, everything under my hand is amazingly flat. This whole area is amazingly flat. And yet, Bretz is talking about a Spokane flood. In other words, something isn't quite working out here. Why do we have, like even today, we say the Missoula floods came like this. And they came through this narrow chute. And John Stockton's house is right in the middle of this fire hose. Why doesn't Spokane look like the Grand Coulee? Why don't we have towering walls and a flat floor? I mean, we've got basalt in the area. If this is where the high energy water is screaming through and screaming right over Spokane, why don't we think about Missoula floods at all? I don't, and I'm a geologist in Washington. I don't think of the Ice Age floods when I'm walking Bloomsday. I'm 6'5", 280. You think I'm going to run 26 miles? Give me a break. Walking was my move. Okay, here's what I have for you. If this works for you visually, let me give you something just simply off of Google Maps. Spokane is here. Here's this incredibly flat area from Spokane all the way up to Lake Pend Oreille. Now, as a geology student, I would hope you would look at this and go, something's not right here. Look at how, I'm not flipping you off. Look at how wrinkly it is here. Look at how wrinkly it is here. Look at how rugged the topography is, in other words. Why does the rugged stuff just stop? And why is it so baby skin smooth through there? This is called the Rathdrum Prairie. I'm talking about the Rathdrum Prairie. And you might go, well, it's not that hard, is it? You just said that the ice dam was here. I didn't say it, but I think you know, the Missoula floods had a huge ice dam, and then there finally was enough water in Montana to break through the ice dam, and this water is going 60 miles an hour easily down along this arrow. And you might go, well, isn't this just a case where all that wrinkly stuff was just blasted away by the water? And the answer is actually no. What you're looking at is a deposit. There's fast water for sure. Here's where we're bursting out. Here's where we broke the ice dam in northern Idaho. And here's this shotgun of water coming down to John Stockton's house. But what I'm getting at is that there's 600 feet of gravels that were dumped into this area. It's a deposit, even though the water's moving very, very fast. You're dumping a bunch of Montana and northern Idaho rocks into this whole valley. 600 feet of this stuff. And the thing that I'm so excited about is that if you really know the area, these black things are lakes. Spokane people can probably help us name some of these lakes. That one, I can't read backwards, and then I haven't labeled on this one. So they're like Newman Lake and Spirit Lake and a bunch of others. Even Lake Coeur d'Alene. Do you know why those lakes are there? There used to be rivers that flowed into this main river valley. But all this belching of gravels, 600 feet of gravels, dumped into this valley and dammed each one of these rivers, and it's no accident then that we have lakes along the margin. Isn't this cool? I'll go back now that you understand the story. You see the lakes now? Those are Ice Age lakes. And you're like, oh, Ice Age lakes. Oh, I guess so the glacier was there and like scooped. No. I'm saying these are all rivers that came in from the margins that were dammed up by all those marbles that were dumped into the valley floor. I think that's amazing. So I have one more sketch that I did in Sharpie. This isn't it, but I'm going to remind you one more time then. I've got a thing that I drew in the Sharpie which shows what I just told you, the Rathdrum Prairie and the gravels that were dumped quickly on top of the Spokane Valley. But also I've tried to put into my Sharpie illustration these guys as well in a little bit more realistic way to view it. And then we'll go to your questions. No Cozy Fort tonight. So one more time, what we started with, photos that remain in rough draft form on Tom's computer. This is the Precambrian rock along I-90. But if we do the Precambrian metamorphic rock, the Cretaceous granites, the German chocolate cake, and the Ice Age flood gravels, I stole this from Andy Buddington. He has a little short little roadside, his little Spokane Geology lesson online. This, I liked his cartoon here, so I've embellished it a little bit. Let me give you a second to soak this in. North to south, across the Spokane Valley. Mount Spokane to the north of Spokane itself. Dishman Hills to the south of I-90. We actually do have a coulee at Spokane. Now, this is me taking a little bit of artistic license. I don't think we have the imagery to really see this grand coulee-like walls, but to me, it makes sense that when we bring these huge Ice Age floods through here, there's so much energy with the floods, multiple floods, we must have hauled a bunch of that basalt out of there. And then in the place of this grand coulee, quote unquote, Spokane coulee, if we're making up things, we're going to dump this, I'm not kidding now, 600 feet of gravels and boulders and sand. But it's mostly, as I understand it, real cobbly stuff. And maybe we have some farmers from the Rathdrum Prairie or somebody who can tell us about the details of that. But there's a great aquifer at the bottom of that for drinking water in the Spokane area. It's all tied to these Ice Age gravels that came in. So this is my best attempt to summarize graphically our individual little chapters that we were talking about before. Australia time, Idaho Arc time. I guess I left off the plant fossil beds now that I think about it. German chocolate cake, Ice Age gravels. Let's see if I have anything else before we go to you. Yes, I do. I have one more thing. So if you were with us on Saturday morning, that was a program from Wenatchee, and I had a very memorable, unforgettable person with me, Randy Lewis, Native American. Go watch that one if you didn't see it. I know that you'll enjoy it. I think you won't forget it. And because of the kindness and generosity and abilities of Randy, I'm now thinking much more about Native American stuff, you know? Haven't really thought much about Native Americans, just based on my upbringing. Not proud of it, just the way it is. But I got an email from Sharon this morning at 11 o'clock, and I want to read it to you. Hi, Nick. I've enjoyed your live streams, blah, blah, blah. I live in Wenatchee. When you had Randy Lewis on last Saturday, what a great program. I was reminded about what I had found about Bretz and a possible exposure to Native American legends about the Spokane floods that I have speculated might have helped trigger his interest in our region. So here's a whole nother approach to dealing with Bretz showing up in 1922. He was invited out to do some mapping by the high school teachers. But possibly Bretz had floods in his brain by being introduced to this Native American account of Ice Age floods in Spokane. And I don't know, Sharon. I don't know how credible this is. No offense, Sharon, but I'm just going to read what she sent to me. And it sounds like she's working on some kind of book. I'm passing along an excerpt about Bretz and the Spokane flood story from a book I am writing. Good luck with your John Stockton House live stream. All right, so here's her passage. First paragraph talks about Bretz, who he was. Second paragraph, what is interesting to note is that the Native Americans of the Columbia Plateau already knew about the great floods that wreaked such havoc with their homeland, and this story was passed down orally, generation after generation, for literally thousands of years. The native story was finally written down by Colville Indian agent Richard Gwydir and read to the Spokane Historical Society in the late 1800s, over 20 years before Bretz came to the Spokane area. Did Bretz hear of this native tale of flooding prior to their formulating his theory? What we do know is that Bretz centered his initial fieldwork in the 1920s around the Spokane area and went so far as to first call the phenomenon the Spokane flood. Here is the ancestor's tale as told to Gwydir by Chief Lot. A long time, this is Chief Lot now speaking about this oral tradition he's been told. A long time ago, the country around where Spokane Falls are now, and for many days' journey east of it, was a large and beautiful lake. In the lake were many islands, and on its shores were many villages with many people. The Indians were well fed and happy, for there were plenty of fish in the lake and plenty of deer and elk in the country around it. Excuse me for just a second. There was a lake. Glacial Lake Columbia sat over Spokane. And we have dozens of Glacial Lake Missoula events. And when we break the ice dam, that water plows into a temporary Ice Age lake called Glacial Lake Columbia. So we do have Ice Age lake beds to back up, to intersect with the story from Chief Lot. But one summer morning, this is back to the Chief Lot's Native American tradition, but one summer morning, the people were startled by a rumbling and a shaking of the earth. The waters of the lake rose. Soon the waves became mountains of water that broke with fury against the shore. Then the sun was blotted out, and darkness covered the land and the water. Terrified, the people ran to the hills to get away from the pounding water. For 2 days the earth rumbled and quaked, and then a rain of ashes began to fall. It fell for several weeks. At last the ashes stopped falling. The waters of the lake became quiet, and the Indians came down from the hills, but soon the lake began to disappear. Dry land rose where the water had been. Many people died, for there was nothing to eat. The game animals had run away when the people fled to the hills, and no one dared go out on the lake to fish. Some of the water was flowing westward from the lake that remained. The people followed it until they came to a waterfall. Soon they saw salmon coming up the new river from the big river west of them. So they built a village beside the waterfall in the new river and made it their home. Back to Sharon in her book, apparently. It took decades of geologic fieldwork to establish what the Native Americans already knew. There was an ancient vast lake in the vicinity east of Spokane that was drained catastrophically by a great flood. There was a massive Glacier Peak tephra eruption and some other conflagration about this time. Perhaps if scientists regard this story as an eyewitness account, they may also find correlating evidence of ash and tephra to support native accounts that volcanism or conflagration also accompanied this event. We have found some Glacier Peak ash in Montana. It sits on top of those glacial Lake Missoula beds, but it's not out of the question from the evidence that we have so far. She's got two final notes, and then I turn it to you. Bretz first published his theory in 1923, that's true. A copy of Guidier's story about the Spokane flood, as told to him by Chief Lott, was printed in the Washington Historical Quarterly in April 1907. Bretz was a high school teacher in Seattle from 1905 to about 1910, and then went to Chicago to earn his PhD in geology. And this is Sharon talking. While I have been unable to discover the precise date that Guidier first learned this story, Chief Lott died in 1902, so it had to be prior to 1902. So thank you, Sharon, for that. If we have, that's one use of these live streams, is to just kind of continue to learn and have experts chiming in. So if you have leads on this, I'd be very interested in following through on that. And I actually emailed Randy a couple hours ago seeing if he had heard about Chief Lott. Let me check we're going to start our live Q&A. Go ahead and type in use your uppercase, please, to type in some questions. But let me check my email quick, see if Randy, maybe Randy was checking with a couple relatives over in Spokane. Nope, nothing from him. Rob just sent an email about Spirit Lake. Rob, what do you got to say? Here's a picture of Spirit Lake, Hoodoo Valley North. Yeah. The emails have been coming in fast and furious, and there's a lot of great tips and a lot of great help, and I appreciate all the help that people offer. Okay. Let's do some live Q&A. It's 6:55. The wind's still pretty strong. Grab my coat quick. Appreciate you joining us tonight. I hope I helped answer a few questions. We'll see where you want to go here. I might have a few extra things to offer. I'll pop the chat out like a boss, right between the eyes. Oh, I'm a live chatter. I'm not top chat. I don't roll with top chat. Are you kidding me? Come on. Don't insult me like that. Thomas, could we say the water acted like a lahar? That's an interesting thought, Thomas. Thank you. There's certainly plenty of sediment being carried in the water. Boulders being rolled ass over tea kettle down the bottom of the flood path. As we've talked about, huge icebergs being carried in the top. I mean, it's quite a dynamic scene. To that extent, yeah. Thank you. How did the ice gravel boulders get cleared out? Michael. Well, if we're talking about these guys, Michael, they're still there. I mean, there's wells for drinking water in the middle of the Rathdrum Prairie or Spokane Valley that go down 600 feet. And those things were not scooped out of there by a younger event. Now, the Spokane River, I guess, is that over here, right? Spokane River's over here. So it's cut down through some of the basalt, and that's the different falls within the Spokane River course. But we may be miscommunicating here, Michael, but I don't think they got cleared out. William, could a moraine have been left behind a glacier but then washed away by the flood? Bretz said he entertained that possibility, but for some reason, I don't know what his reasoning was, he was sure that the moraine never was deposited there. And it turns out it wasn't. If I didn't finish my story, the maps, oh, well, I'll do it here. So if Bretz made another, maybe he did make another map in the 60s, I'm not sure, but I should do that. I should look at Brett's later maps. He changed, oh God. Once Bretz was clear that the Ice Age floodwater came from Montana and came through here, then he knew that there was never ice sitting on top of Spokane. He didn't have evidence for that. But he wanted this floodwater to be coming underneath the ice. And one of his rivals was Joseph Pardee, who was in the room when Pardee was embarrassed greatly in 1927 back in Washington, D.C. That's a whole nother story. But there was bad blood apparently between Pardee and Bretz for much of their working careers. By the way, this is I-90, Interstate 90, and I think many, I may be wrong about this, but I think many, if they hear that the Missoula flood water was in Glacial Lake Missoula, like Missoula, Montana, true, and that incredible floods of Missoula floodwater came over Spokane, true, I think people assume, at least some of them do, that that Missoula flood came right down I-90. Like that's the drive. It's a 3-hour drive from Spokane to Missoula, and maybe you're thinking Missoula flood the whole way. That's not true. Lookout Pass is too high. So the Glacial Lake Missoula water broke through up by Lake Pend Oreille. It wasn't a straight shot from Missoula to Spokane. It was Missoula up to Sandpoint, Idaho, and then down to Spokane. Rodney, is there a date connected to the pillow basalts located near John Stockton's house on I-90? The pillow basalts, which I think are amazing, are at Bowl and Pitcher. Maybe it's called River, no, I don't know the name of the little city park there. Just go to Bowl and Pitcher, and that's Priest Rapids lava, which is maybe 15.9 million years old. Robert, is the fossil record part of the evidence for Australia as the former partner of North America? Can you give some examples? Thanks. Yeah, I did a live stream on supercontinents, and I also did a formal YouTube lecture on supercontinents where we got through all that evidence. I think I erased it, but when Australia was connected to John Stockton's backyard, we have evidence, lots of it. One of the main pieces of evidence are things called zircons, little durable minerals. And we have Australian zircons that were brought by rivers and deposited in Idaho and Montana. And we have zircons that were originally in Idaho and Montana that are now in Australia. When the two continents were together, there are rivers going back and forth. Isn't that cool? And we didn't have that zircon work originally. We had attempts to match Precambrian bedrock types and try to find distinctive metamorphic rocks to match up. Patrick, age 6, are those gravels in the Rathdrum Prairie sorted by size like in rivers? Were they deposited by the Ice Age floods or from the ice sheet? Thank you. Always good questions, Patrick. I'm drawing them here as pretty well sorted, wouldn't you say, Patrick? Like all these rocks are pretty much, I made my little green circles about the same. I kind of Charlie Browned it, you know. But this is fast water. There's no time to sort out the rocks. So I can think of a few places just off of I-90 in the Spokane Valley where there are huge boulders. And I think I know there's huge quarries right off of I-90 right there to do sand and gravel operations. So there's sand, there's boulders, and there's these cobbles as well. But it was all Ice Age floods, Patrick. No ice sheet there. No ice sheet. All Ice Age floods. Just a big bam. And that's just one event. We had multiple, maybe dozens of floods through there. Eric, any other native accounts of these ancient disasters? Will Randy be back? You all loved Randy, and I know why. He's a terrific. He's so gifted at what he does. I'm just starting to learn Native American stories. And I'm hoping to continue with Randy to learn what I can. And of course, he's just Central Washington. He doesn't know as much about Native stories from the coast, let's say, with Cascadia earthquakes, etc. But I've always meant to look into this, but I never found the right person to open up that world. And Randy's the guy for me, for sure. Samuel, more info on the Spokane Aquifer. I got all I got for you, man. I'm sorry. You know, you drive an I-90 through here, especially east of downtown, and there are these huge, like, water tower looking things. I think they're like red and white checkerboard. Is that right? Those are the pumps. I think I don't really know what I'm talking about now, but that's tapping into that aquifer. Those are related to getting the water out of that aquifer. Beyond that, I'm sorry, I don't know. Oh, the neighbors are looking at me now, a little strange. I need to stop yelling. Jack, have the carbonized trees in the basalt near Spokane been dated? I don't know. I don't know about those carbonized trees. You don't mean petrified wood? I mean, there's petrified wood tied to those basalt layers. And if so, they're dated at 16 million. Is there limestone in the Spokane area? Nothing comes to mind, Mary. You might know of some limestone there. If it is, it would be part of the oldest Precambrian stuff, but I'm not aware of that. Richard, is the belt supergroup still considered to be the protolith for the metamorphics around Spokane? Yes. You know how this goes. There's all sorts of subdivisions of subdivisions of subdivisions as far as names and labels and everything else, but it is totally appropriate. Let me show you. Let me find that quad again. Richard, all these grays and these purples are belt, are Precambrian rocks that are pretty much the same bedrock story as all through western Montana. Yep, it wasn't even worth going to that map. I don't know why I did that. Okay, so you guys are confused about what I said about the ice sheet. Yes, the ice sheet never got over Spokane. Bretz mapped it that way originally, but there's no evidence for ice ever being on top of Spokane. I'm sorry if I gave you the wrong impression. I thought it was interesting that his early maps from Pardee and Bretz showed the Spokane ice crossing over Spokane. But now that we understand that the Missoula floods ripped through there regularly, there's no evidence for the ice that far south. Is there evidence of sorting by size of the gravels? Okay, did that. Glacial Lake Columbia, asked John, asking about gravel layers. Yes, one of these live streams I told the story of, it was the British Columbia live stream. I talked about meeting Jerome, remember him? And it was a multiple day field trip. And one of our stops on the first day in Spokane area was going to a gravel pit near the Spokane airport, and I don't understand what I was looking at. There's huge gravels in the floor of Glacial Lake Columbia, big boulders, sand. It surprised me. So if you go to the Hangman Valley, there's another name, but I can't remember the other name of the Hangman Valley, the golf course there, those are glacial Lake Columbia sediments. And if I haven't been clear, I know that I've been clear in past sessions. It was common for a Missoula flood to suddenly drain Glacial Lake Missoula, but that water would dump into Glacial Lake Columbia. So it was a daisy chain. You had one lake draining, dumping into another one, and then that lake, suddenly that bathtub got too full and the water spilled over the south edge of the bathtub and a flood happened. So it's not like this was dry land most of the time. I think the last couple of Missoula, is that right? No, it's a couple, that big 18,000 year flood over Wenatchee, that truly was draining Glacial Lake Missoula and having dry land at John Stockton's house. But for many of the Missoula floods, there was lakes coexistent at the time. Good questions as always. When is Randall Carlson co-hosting? Is there a radon problem in Spokane due to the gravel from the floods? I don't know about that. Sorry. Peter, did I understand you correctly? Volcanic ash at the time of the floods. A couple other questions about Glacier Peak. Glacier Peak is a volcano north of Stevens Pass. I can't remember the exact date now. It had famously erupted and sent ash eastward. I can't remember the date. I'm going to say 13,000 years ago, but I guess that's right. Because there's Glacier Peak ash on top of Pangbourne Bar, and then there's Clovis Points on top of the Glacier Peak ash. I meant to have Randy talk about that, by the way, and I forgot. It's an amazing site. So there is Glacier Peak ash. I'm pretty sure the date's 13,000. Maybe a geologist can correct me if I'm wrong. Calendar dates, calendar years, 13,000, Glacier Peak. And so that's a little young. Actually, I know that's too young. Right, 13,000 is too young for any of the known Missoula flood events that we have in the geologic record. So I guess now that I think of it, I guess that Native American story where there's ashes falling out of the sky and a big flood, the devil's in the details, but I don't think we have that happening simultaneously as we understand it so far. Now, we might find some new field sites that can confirm that story. So close, but no cigar yet as far as the Glacier Peak ash and Missoula flood deposits. Bill says there's Lower Cambrian limestone at the south end of Lake Pend Oreille. Thank you, Bill. Lower Cambrian. So slightly younger than our Precambrian story. Thank you. So not right at Spokane, but there is some limestone, Lake Pend Oreille. Where in Australia are the Washington zircons found? I can't remember. I'm sorry. I don't know the geography well enough to even know which coast of Australia was in John Stockton's backyard. If you're joining late, you don't know why am I talking about John Stockton. It's an inside joke. No offense. Yeah, it might rain. Who cares? Why are there no giant current ripples? Shot glass philosophy asks. Interesting question. There are some pretty impressive giant current ripples. Is it Airway Heights? Spokane Airport. I think just south, between the airport and Airway Heights, there are some pretty amazing giant current ripples there. I don't know off the top of my head if we have giant current ripples across Rathdrum Prairie. Now, you know what I would go to look for that if I had time. If you were just asking me in real time, I'd say, let me check this book quick. This is it, man. This is it. This is book 2. And book 1 is just Bruce himself. Bruce was a former graduate student at Eastern Washington, and his advisor was Eugene Keever. And all the detail you would want about the Ice Age floods in northern Washington is in this book. Oh yeah, here you go. I bookmarked the page for a reason. Oh, and there's a visa bill in here too. You want to see how we did with spending and Vindman's Bakery, you gotta love it. Here's a nice map from Bjornstad. Rathdrum, lakes, dam the rivers, dam the torpedoes, ice dam. So there may be some other giant current ripples on Rathdrum. I'm not sure of them. We'll do a few more. It's already 7:15. Oh, and I'm getting Adobe updated right now. Isn't that nice? Bill says there's large crossbeds visible in many of the local sand pits. Crossbeds, I believe it. So cross-bedded sands showing this incredible current. Different than giant current ripples, but yes, flow structures for sure. Alan, could many of the erratics west of Spokane be from the Spokane area? Yes. Almost all those erratic, no. If you know of an erratic down here, it's not glacial ice for sure. It's ice age floods for sure, rafted in on ice most likely. And many of these erratics are from Idaho or even Montana. But if you're asking, is it possible to just take a little bit of rock from the bedrock of Spokane and move it 5 miles and then drop it down by Cheney? Sure. But I included argillite as one of the Precambrian bedrock units in the Spokane area and then going back into Montana because some of my favorite erratics down at where Tom Foster used to live in Pasco is argillite from the Rocky Mountains. There's no other way to explain an erratic, a boulder the size of me, made out of argillite, a very laminated, bluish-grayish metamorphic rock. It's a unique rock that you're only going to find in the Rockies. And to have that rock be carried by water, 300 miles or whatever it is, amazing stuff. If it hasn't dawned on you, this is really the foothills of the Rockies here. We're intersecting with a kind of a Cascades and rain shadow of the Cascades, but by the time we get to Hoop Fest, we're in the foothills of the Rockies, and you can feel it. And you can see it with the bedrock itself. 3 more and we're done. Let me scroll all the way down to the fresh here. Work my way back. Maury Longo, what is the basement layer made of in the Spokane area? Is it basalt or more exotic terrains? The basement layer. I would go with C. The basement layer truly is this old west coast of North America rock. Beach rock, when the beach of North America, when the west coast of North America was there at Spokane. That's what I would consider the basement rock. And I guess I had that in my sketch. Hang on, Patrick. Yeah. So here's our oldest Precambrian rock connected to Australia. Here's these magmas coming up when we subduct the Kula plate, when much of Washington is not there yet. And by the time we get to the lavas, we've built the entire state of Washington. I just spit on the camera. 2 more. Bill, the Rathdrum community was dead set against Burlington Northern's plan to construct a fueling facility at Hauser due to the aquifer. Thank you. Yeah, there's... Oh, Bill works for the railroad. He would know. Couple more. Bruce says the zircons are found in the Jack Range of northwestern Australia. Northwestern Australia. Wow. Thank you for that. Steve, is it possible that the sudden floods could cause dust storms from the sheer power involved? Well, it's an interesting thought. I mean, I'm not really trying to think like a Native American necessarily, but just as any human being, what would your experience be if you're sitting around a campfire at Vantage? And is it a half an hour? Is it an hour before the water arrives from Montana that you notice something? Is it a sound? Is it a vibration on the ground? Is it the animals doing something weird? Is it 10 minutes before so a dust cloud or a bunch of air being displaced out in front? I mean, I guess people must have thought of that, studying that, but when I try to do things for a TV crew or something, I try to get people there. And so without any science behind me, I try to just imagine what it must have been like. And as always, we can be very excited about the science and figuring all this out, but we are almost certainly talking about unimaginable tragedy with the people in the area. I'm going to look for one more. Seeing a lot of the same questions, so I guess we've covered most of it. Come on, I gotta get one more. Does Australia fit next to Spokane like a puzzle piece? Jim, I think, good question. I think if we were able to carefully model what the old shoreline truly did look like, and we do kind of have an idea about that. It's called the strontium 706 line. It's a convoluted geochemical way to be able to figure out down below I-90 exactly where the old shoreline used to be. And you can look at that. You can Google right now, old shoreline, old North American edge in Washington. You'll see different versions. Some put it right at Spokane. Some put it at the county line. Some put the old edge of North America at the Precambrian days way out by Moses Lake. But you can do some geophysical work to try to get that contour. And then you have to do the same thing in Australia at the Jack Hills, I guess. Is that right? I thought Jack Hills was like the oldest rocks on the planet. We're not really talking about the oldest rocks on the planet here. But anyway, you could get those things to match, but I don't think we have the resolution and the detail necessary to restore those former coastlines very well. Thank you, everybody, for your questions. A toast to you and a look ahead to the rest of the week. A toast to you. And a look ahead to the rest of the week. Tomorrow night I got a couple of surprises for you when we talk about George Beck, Central Washington University geology professor from 100 years ago, who was instrumental in setting up Ginkgo State Park and was the authority on petrified wood in the Pacific Northwest. Thursday, we go back even earlier in time to a geologist that I've always meant to learn about. His name was Israel Russell. We're back in the 1890s, and he's around making geologic maps of Mount Rainier, etc. Looking forward to learning what I can for you for that. This is the valley I live in, and I almost certainly will be outdoors somewhere broadcasting from the field. And then Sunday, I'm not flipping you off, paleomagnetism globally. A toast to you. Here's to you wanting to spend time with us on this beautifully calm Tuesday evening in Ellensburg, Washington. Here's to you. I thank you for joining us tonight. I hope that you can squeeze us into your schedule again tomorrow night for a couple of surprises. I'll be coy till then. And I'll also be Nick until then, and maybe even during then. What? Loud people under the age of 30 walking up the sidewalk. Let's just enjoy that for a second. We're all just extras in their movie. Thank you and good night. I love you.